things do not exist independently. And that's usually described in terms of things are empty of inherent existence, meaning things are not inherently existent, things are not independently existent. So this term here, empty of inherent existence, this is emptiness. In Sanskrit, shunyata. And the Sanskrit word shunyata, the root is shunya, which means zero. Zero, the number zero. But here it literally means hollow. No core, no essence. So emptiness does not mean things don't exist. It simply means things are not independently existent. Why? Because they are dependently existent.
The shunyata is zero and what else?
Shunya.
And hollow.
Shunya means zero and ta is like ness. Zero-ness meaning like...
okay.
Yeah, it's like turning into a description. So it really means like zero, meaning as in like empty, like hollow, no essence, meaning no, not existing, not having its own unique identity as that thing. So this word, the fact that things exist dependently, the term used is dependent arising. The word arising here means coming into existence. So things come into existence dependently. Therefore, they are not independent. Therefore, they are empty of inherent existence. They're not inherently existent. So therefore, to understand emptiness, it's helpful to understand what do we mean by things being dependent, because that's the flip side of emptiness. So what I'd like to do now is have a look at what do we mean by things existing dependently. There are a number of ways in which we can talk about things being dependent, coming into existence dependently. The first way is that things exist depending on causes and conditions. For example, this laptop here exists depending on causes and conditions. One of the first conditions necessary for us to have this laptop here is someone need to think about designing this. And then, of course, all the raw materials needed to be gathered. Those raw materials needed to be refined, all the various components needed to be manufactured, and all those components to be assembled. And then, of course, all the people and factories and so forth also necessary in that process. So all of those causes and conditions are necessary for us to have the laptop here now. I think that's fairly straightforward. But also, everything exists depending on parts. Again, this laptop exists depending on its parts, because without the metal frame, the screen, the keyboard, the electronic components, the battery and so on, without all of these parts, there would be no laptop. So again, that's fairly straightforward, not difficult to appreciate. But remember here, this reasoning, the fact that things are dependent, should be overturning the idea that they're independent, because things can't be dependent and independent. They're one or the other. So this idea that things are dependent should be overturning our idea that things are independent. But maybe for most of us here, we are quite happy to accept that this laptop exists depending on causes and conditions, it exists depending on its parts, but at the same time, maybe we're happy to accept that when we come into the room, there's already a laptop existing here on the table. True?
Yes. Yeah.
That should be impossible. According to this logic, it can't be independent and dependent at the same time. The reason we can accept that is because we only have a quite a superficial understanding of causes and conditions and parts. We don't understand these ideas at the deepest level. To understand these at the deepest level, we have to go to the third way in which things are dependent. And the third way in which things are dependent is they depend on labelling, designation, conception. These three words mean the same thing, just three different words for the same thing. And when we look at this, we might think, I think I know what that means. It means there's a thing here and I'm calling it a laptop. Again, that's quite a superficial understanding of labelling, designation, conception. To try to understand that at a deeper level, we can understand that when we look out on the world, we're receiving a mass of sense data, particularly visual data. And we have to make sense or meaning out of all of this data, otherwise we can't function. So what we do is we draw lines around various collections of data and we create meaningful objects so that we can function. And we do more than that because we're not living in isolation. In order to communicate with others, we have to then give names to those things that we've created. So this labelling, designation, conception is this process of drawing lines, creating objects, and then giving the name. And how we do this line drawing is not fixed. It's completely arbitrary, depending on the meaning that we want to get out of what we see. For example, how many things are there?
1. 6.
For most of the time, probably the most meaningful thing to do is draw one line around all of that data, create one object and call it a star. But on some other occasions it may be more meaningful to draw 2 lines, create 2 objects and say there's 2 triangles there. Another occasion it may be more meaningful to draw 6 lines, create 6 objects and say there's 6 triangles there. On another occasion 7 lines, 7 objects, 6 triangles and a hexagon. Another occasion it may be more meaningful to say there's a collection of 18 lines there. So is there 1, 2, 6, 7, 18 objects there? How many things are there? We decide. There is no star to be found there independent of our conceptual framework. The only star that exists is the one we've created in our mind by drawing a line, creating an object and giving it a name star. So therefore here we find 2 terms often being used. We often hear that things are merely labelled. Merely, of course, means only, just. Merely labelled means things only exist within our conceptual framework. And then another term that's often used in this context is things are not findable. Not findable means you cannot find the object in the basis. Meaning there's no star to be found there in the basis. Because the only star that exists is the one we've created in our mind. So that's what not findable means. It doesn't mean, therefore, there's no star. It just means there's no star to be found in the basis, existing from its own side. Because the only star that exists is the one we've created in our mind. So these two terms are commonly used in this context.
So there's no sun and no moon and no clouds? And
No, there is no sun or moon independent of our conceptual framework. There's a sun, there's a moon, there's a star, there's two triangles, there's 6 triangles, all of these things
The sun
exist.
is not necessarily one thing. It's like...
Well, if we look closely at the sun, it's not one thing, is it? It's like a mass of energy and flames and, I mean, just like a cup, we can say, you know, is there one thing here? Well, we could create one. We could say, well, there's 2 things here. We could say there's just billions of atoms there. I mean, we decide. But there's still a cup. We're not denying that there's no star. But what we're saying here is there's no star there independent of our conceptual mind. Because the star only exists in our conceptual mind. Any questions? Yeah.
Yeah, so how does that negate the fact that it doesn't exist objectively? Because I can say, okay, I just label everything, like we talked about it yesterday, but it exists. I just don't...
But hang on, you said it, meaning there's one thing?
No, like the...
The what? The what? You said it, we label it. So when you say it, you've already created one thing.
No, but like... when we talked yesterday about the Theravada view,
right.
So it's kind of like, you know, they say, okay, nothing has properties, like we just label everything, but objectively it exists, we just, not as we label it.
That's because in Theravada, the cup is the collection of its parts. Here, there's no cup to be found there. And if we go down to the next level, there's no atom to be found there, because atom is a concept we've created based on the parts. So we go down, 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 down to subatomic particles, down to Higgs boson. We can go right down as far as possible. There's no bottom. There's nothing there from its own side.
But does that mean it doesn't exist
No.
objectively?
What do you mean by objective? Independent of the observer? Yes, that's what it means. The real question, this is the real question, and then we'll take a break. The real question, you know, we asked the question, Alan Wallace said, you know, if we leave the room, is there still something here? When we ask that question, we tend to ask the question that there's a me, independent me leaving the room. If there really is an independent me leaving the room, then absolutely, yes, there's a laptop still here when I go out. And the Theravada would agree with that. Here we're saying, no, 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 no. So the real interesting question is, who's the me that's leaving the room? There is a me leaving the room, but is there an independent me leaving the room? That's the question. Because when people ask these questions, but there's something there, it's usually with the assumption there's an independent me here asking that. And of course, if there is an independent me here, then of course there's an independent world there. Of course. Of course.
I don't understand that.
One more clarification. So the flowers, how do, in the Theravada, they believe they come into existence?
Through causes and conditions and parts. See, in Theravada, in all Buddhist traditions, they would accept this. There's 4 main philosophical systems in Buddhism, called Vaibhashika, Sautrantika, Chittamatra, Madhyamika. All of them would accept this. All of them except the one we're talking about now do not accept this.
Yeah, but the causes and conditions, like they also fall under karma, right? That's, no. Like everything has a reason. Like.
Yeah, but there's no karma in the physical world.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like in.
It's just causality, cause and conditions.
Okay, so I mean, like in Mahayana, they believe that we see stuff, the world around us, because of our karmic.
Yeah, but we don't need to bring that discussion in here.
Yeah,
I think
so,
that's not really relevant here.
But so in the Theravada, they believe the flowers are just there, like
they're there.
The Big Bang and stuff like that.
They're there.
That's why it's there.
The flowers are there, and they're made up of very subtle atomic particles. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
That's Theravada view.
Okay.
And Theravada would say, well, you know, as a human, we'd probably call them flowers, but there's stuff there.
Yeah.
There's stuff there. We just happen to, because we're humans, we call that a flower. Maybe some other animal calls it food, but there's some stuff there.
And Mahayana says it doesn't exist, the flower.
Flowers exist. You exist. But we're going to talk about what that really means in the next session. Last question, then we need to have a break. Yeah.
The assertion is that things do not exist independently.
Correct.
Wouldn't that be things do not exist independently within our capacity to observe the universe? Because we have no capability of observing whether there's anything beyond the subjective. Because
Right, but even if there is, there would be no way to confirm that.
so isn't the assertion then that within the capacity of our world's view, we can only assert?
No, the assertion here is that the consciousness is primary and the physical world is secondary. That's the assertion. If the assertion was that the physical world is primary, then we'd have this thing.
Is it okay?
And what again do you mean by consciousness?
Mind. Awareness.
Okay, so if you accept that, then the rest follows.
Yeah. Very quick, we have to have a break.
Okay, so does that mean that modern science, the practice of observing outside, is actually learning the mechanics of our own perception?
Sorry, you lost me.
Physics.
Right, physics. You're talking classical physics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If we look at it in the light of what you're saying, emptiness,
Right.
does that mean we're actually just learning the mechanics of our own perception? Atoms, gravity.
Mechanics of our own perception.
Well,
what we're saying here from these couple of quotes is that the only world that we can know is the world that we experience.
So whatever is repeatedly, experimentally proven in that world is actually,
Proven,
or observed,
yeah.
is actually only telling us about our own minds.
Labeling of our own minds.
Not labeling.
No.
Not labeling.
Proof is a label.
No. Well, a brief answer, then we'll have a break.
Okay.
This view is not saying, and there is a system in Buddhism that says this, it's called the Chittamatra philosophical system. The Chittamatra philosophical system says there is no material world whatsoever. There's no such thing as matter. There seems to be, but actually it's just internal to the mind. That's Chittamatra. So for them, there is no external world at all. It's internal to the mind, and it seems to be material, but if we reflect on, meditate, we'll come to see there's no material. And they also use the analogy of a lucid dream. Because in a dream, there seems to be matter.
Yeah.
If we become lucid, we'll realize, even though there seems to be matter, there's no matter in the dream at all. And so they say that if you meditate on emptiness, you'll come to realize this. That there appears to be matter, but actually there's no matter at all. It's all mental stuff. That's not the view here.
What is the name of this?
Chittamatra, mind only. That's not the view here. So this system we're following, which is called the Madhyamika system, is not saying everything's internal to the mind. Things exist external, but not independent. There is material stuff, but not material stuff independent of the mind. So we're not negating the material world. We're simply negating an objective material world. Whereas Shamatha negate material worlds altogether. They say there is no material world at all. It's an illusion.
So,
I just want to say something.
wait.
Wait. Actually, we've got to take a break. Let's take a break and we'll continue discussion at 10:45.